there's just so much.
You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters this podcast was recorded on. It's early 2015 and single mum and entrepreneur Belle Gibson is living a life of luxury and success. She has a widely popular recipe app called the Whole Pantry, which features nourishing plant-based recipes, and she's preparing to release a book of the same name. Last year, she was named Elle magazine's Most Aspiring Woman You've Met This Year and was Cosmo magazine's Fun Fearless Female recipient. Her app claimed the Apple title of Best Food and Drink App of 2013, and a few short years later, she's already enjoying over 1 million in sales. Her empire is built on an inspiring story of triumph, a harrowing and heartwarming story of survival. She first started posting about her malignant brain cancer on Instagram in 2013. Diagnosed in 2009 at the age of 20, she was given just 4 months to live. Instead of doing the usual chemotherapy and radiation treatments, Belle opted for alternative remedies, and as she shared with her growing fan base, they worked. They healed her. She spoke of a healthy diet, free of gluten and sugar, of salt, vitamin and oxygen treatments, of the power of colonics and the benefits of Ayurvedic medicine, an ancient Indian holistic healing system. She encouraged her hundreds of thousands of followers to empower themselves and reclaim their lives through wellness, to heal themselves, like she did, naturally. But it was all a lie. All of it. And it was one of her close friends who first cottoned on to the truth. I'm Gemma Barth, and this is True Crime Conversations, a Mamma Mia podcast exploring the world's most notorious crimes by speaking to the people who know the most about them. A brand new series has just dropped on Netflix.
I was diagnosed with a stage 4 brain tumour. That was 4 years ago. Human beings are capable of anything. I was on a quest to heal myself naturally. I've learned to seek out what's raw and honest.
Apple Cider Vinegar follows the story of Belle Gibson's success, lies and demise. And right now, it's the TV show everyone's talking about. Her unravelling started because of a suspicious friend. For Chanelle McAuliffe, there were certain parts of her story that weren't adding up. Certain incidents and symptoms that raised her eyebrow. Eventually, it would be Chanelle that would first confront the con woman. She was the whistleblower that brought down her web of lies and uncovered the damage she was doing to sick, vulnerable people. In Apple Cider Vinegar, the character of Chanelle looks a little bit different to real life. In real life, Chanelle had no relationship with Jess Ainscough, another wellness influencer who was actually living with cancer, whose story is best represented by the character of Miller in the show. She wasn't working for Belle, just a friend of Belle's. But she is the one who confronted her in her house and went to the media. As Belle's story is once again thrust before an international audience, we got the chance to speak to Chanelle. Chanelle, Belle Gibson's name is once again everywhere. It's making headlines because there's a Netflix series out about her life and her crimes. Have you watched it?
I have seen the show. I did have to force myself to watch it. I'm not entirely a huge fan of the show for a number of reasons that we can chat about if you like. But yes, it seems to be a very big story in the media right now.
So originally you weren't going to watch it, were you?
No, I wasn't. I'm not entirely comfortable with dramatization and sensationalization of the story. The show has distorted the truth a little bit as well, and I'm not that comfortable with the capitalization of the harm that was caused to people with cancer. So, yeah, there's obviously Netflix and a film studio and people profiting from that harm that was caused. I've sort of been thinking a lot about the ethics behind this kind of storytelling on that platform. I'm not entirely comfortable with the way that these two characters, Belle and Miller, who Miller is based on a real-life person, Jess Ainscough, who actually did have cancer and was trying to heal her cancer naturally through wellness and natural remedies. They've pitted these two women against each other in the show, which actually didn't occur in real life. And I think it's quite a cliche, unoriginal, stereotypical narrative to kind of pit women against each other competitively as rivals, bitchy, gossipy, which is kind of what was depicted in the show. I just think it was really unnecessary, and I hope that the core messages that are really important about this story, about the harm that was caused to people, about how we can easily be misled or consume misinformation online, I just hope that those important messages aren't lost through the glamorization of this show.
What about your character in the show? Because they use your name, but your character is kind of an amalgamation of you and, you know, other people in Belle's life. How did you feel about the way they portrayed you?
I actually was pleasantly surprised how my character was portrayed. I had no idea what they were going to do with it. I mean, obviously there's many things about my character and in the show that aren't accurate. For example, I wasn't Belle's manager or Jess Ainscogh's manager, Miller's character. I did know Jess Ainscough, but we weren't close friends. However, the scenes where I confront Belle, which is now dubbed the intervention, where I am urging her to come forward and tell the truth, there was a lot of main parts of that scene that were really accurate. And I found that scene to be really compelling. And I think it's really important for me, for the world to see that I did urge Belle to come forward and tell the truth. I never set out to expose Belle or to have Belle cancelled. I actually went to her as her friend and said, if you come forward and tell the truth, I will help you. I will support you with the fallout. And she refused to. And had she done that, things could have played out so much differently for her.
I want to go back to the start of your story because it is quite different to the Netflix show. Tell us about how you met Belle.
Sure. So I was actually doing a writing internship for a publication in Melbourne at the time, and they were more just interested in doing a puff piece on her. We were kind of interested in what she was doing with food and technology and being innovative in this kind of startup space. So I reached out to her and she invited me to the launch event of the Whole Pantry app. And that night it was quite difficult for us to connect and chat. She was hosting the event. There's so many people there. And so she was talking to a lot of people. We just briefly kind of introduced ourselves. And then after that event, we met up for, I think, coffee. And it was really difficult to kind of get any information out of her. And so I just thought I'll just build a bit of rapport with her. It turned out we had some mutual friends. So then we went for coffee again and then lunch and dinner, and we were at similar events together. And naturally, just a friendship formed from there.
What did being friends with Belle look like? Was it constant messaging? Was it hanging out all the time? Was she a good friend?
Belle was really warm and charismatic. She actually had a way of making you feel really special. And looking back, I think this was part of it was quite calculated on her behalf because she had to deflect from herself so much. And if you've seen interviews with her, especially the 60 Minutes interview or in the show, it's very difficult to get a straight answer from her. So she had a way of really making the attention about the other person. So you always felt really kind of special and important in her presence. Our friendship looked like going out for lunch. It centered a lot around food. And what was quite interesting is my partner at the time actually had a traumatic brain injury, and Belle really connected with him and developed a really close friendship with him because she claimed that because of her brain tumor, that also meant she had a traumatic brain injury as a result of the brain tumor. What we've
Right.
now learnt about Belle is that she gravitated to people, especially, people with cancer, to leverage them to her own advantage, to learn about their symptoms and take them on as her own. So she was actually doing that with my partner at the time. However, I wasn't aware of that. And so, yes, they had a close friendship, and our friendship circle kind of just grew as well from there.
What did you think of her success, about the Whole Pantry and everything she was doing in that space?
I was quite impressed by the business she was building. She was quite innovative for that era. It was really early days of social media, especially Instagram, building an audience, connecting with an audience, getting on the Apple Watch. So that was compelling to me at the time. This, regardless if she was sick or not, this young woman, this young single mother, pioneering, this technology and this business. So that side of it was compelling at the time.
When did you start getting a weird feeling? What were the first things that kind of struck you as odd?
So behind the scenes, there would be things like we would go out drinking, and one night, she ordered shots and we were doing shots, and I said, "Oh, should you really be drinking?" Like, she was obviously doing this very strict wellness, natural protocol to heal herself from cancer. So drinking alcohol excessively was kind of really in conflict of that. So I said, "Oh, should you be drinking?" And she said, "Well, I'm going to die anyway, so why not have some fun?" And then there was a time where she also went to the solarium, which I thought was a bit odd given the risk of skin cancer with using solarium. And then the biggest thing for me, well, apart from that, she never appeared sick, ever. Never saw her sick. She was the epitome of wellness, right? This beautiful, long, lush hair. She was glowing. She was active, happy. And then at her son's 4th birthday party, she all of a sudden collapsed to the floor and was having what appeared to be quite a violent seizure. She was convulsing on the ground. Saliva was coming out of her mouth. And this went on for a really long time, about 40 minutes. And about halfway through, I said, "I'm calling an ambulance." And all of a sudden, she kind of comes out of the seizure and says, "No, I don't want Western medicine involved." And so I said, "Okay." And then she kind of went back into the seizure and then it kind of tapered off. And there was just something about it that just seems really performative to me. And yeah, it was that day I left that party that I just knew in my gut that something was really wrong.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, it was soon after that birthday that she announced that her cancer was spreading. But how did you find out about that?
Yes, so she announced on Instagram that she now had stage 4 cancer. It had spread from her brain to her spleen, her uterus, in her blood. It was basically a death sentence. And myself and most of her close friends, we all found out by seeing it on her Instagram, which, we thought was quite odd, that's such serious diagnosis. And, we were all so, caring for her and concerned about her. So yeah, it was really strange that it wasn't something that she shared with anyone really directly. It was just kind of a press announcement.
Once you had this hunch, it's a big leap to go from like having a feeling that something's not quite right to actually like talking to someone about it. Did you kind of mention it to friends and family, try and get some other people involved in how you were feeling?
Yes, I did go to one of our mutual friends and I shared my concerns with him, what I thought were red flags and why things didn't add up for me. And he started to see that, yeah, okay, some of this doesn't make sense. So I asked him if he would come with me to basically hold an intervention, kind of confront Belle and try and get some answers from her. So he agreed to do that, and we went over to Belle's house unannounced, and we sat her down, and I just straight out asked her if she had cancer. And
what did she say?
She was acting kind of very defensive. She was saying that I was interrogating her. She started to slump down in her chair and say that she felt sick and was acting kind of faint, which at that point I kind of knew was based on having seen the seizure. I kind of knew that maybe this was another tactic of hers to all of a sudden, act sick or as a way to deflect. She said that, of course, she was sick. I basically demanded her to go get any medical evidence to prove that she had cancer, any scans, any hospital doctor reports. She said that she didn't like to keep those documents because it's negative energy in her house. And so I asked her about this stage 4 diagnosis that she had just announced. And I said, what hospital did you go to get that diagnosis? Surely it was a major hospital in Melbourne. And she said she didn't go to a hospital. She went to some random doctor's house in the suburbs. He picked her up and drove her there and gave her the diagnosis. And I asked her, who was that doctor? What's his name? And she said, Dr. Phil. And at that point, I actually thought it was so comical that the story was, her story was that ridiculous and that so implausible. So, yeah, Dr. Phil just had me stumped. And so I said, if you've not had a proper diagnosis at a hospital in some random house by this doctor, does that mean your diagnosis is questionable? And she said, well, possibly, because Dr. Phil's gone missing. He's gone to ground. And none of his colleagues know where he is. And so obviously that all just sounded even more suspicious and unbelievable. So at this point, she called Julie Gibbs, the editor, publisher at Penguin Books, and she's asking Julie or accusing Julie of speaking to her friends, and there's one of her friends is jealous and accusing her of not being sick, and did Julie put me up to this, basically. And from what I could tell, Julie seemed really confused on the other end of the phone. Belle then called someone else. She phoned her acupuncturist and asked him to come over. And when he arrived, she said to him, tell them that I have cancer. And this was kind of her way to basically prove to us that she had cancer. And he said, well, of course you have cancer. And I said, well, how do you know that she has cancer? And he said, because she told me.
So it doesn't sound like it was a short conversation. It was over a few hours or so if you had all these different phone calls and visitors and...
Yes, it was quite a few hours. I mean, it seemed like forever at the time. I also went upstairs at her house to try and find Clive, her partner, who was somewhat involved in her business and the Whole Pantry. And Clive was someone who was kind of really difficult to figure out. He was kind of always in the background. He was quite withdrawn, very quiet. So I went upstairs and I found Clive and I said, Clive, you need to tell me the truth. And he said she will destroy anyone that tries to expose her and that he needs to protect her little boy. So it was kind of a very cryptic, confronting answer I got from him. He then came downstairs with me and he sat down with us and we were trying to make sense of it all. And it kind of, the penny didn't drop for me until a little bit later on, but he made a comment that night because I did say to Belle, which you can see in the show, I said to her, this is your inner circle knocking at your door. This is where it starts and this is where it can end, and urging her to come forward on her own terms and tell the truth. And at that point, when I was saying that, Clive said to Belle, you need to get the books in order. And I think what that sort of meant later on was in regards to the charity fraud that Belle was conducting. So the books for her business, weren't in order. She needed to kind of start covering her tracks or start paying the charities. So he was kind of hinting to Belle and basically just putting it out there that she needed to tie up loose ends. So I left that night just being absolutely gobsmacked that it just had confirmed everything for me, that it was all a lie. There was at times for me where there was 1% of me that felt, what if I've got this all wrong? What if I'm accusing this poor young woman of not having cancer when she really does? But that night it just solidified everything for me. And so I left there urging Belle again to come forward and tell the truth. And then a few days later, I called her and I asked her if she was ready to come forward. And again, I was met with defensiveness, some aggression. And then it was maybe a week or a couple of weeks after that, it was her book launch. And we actually weren't really, obviously, kind of friends anymore at this point on talking terms. There was a lot of tension. She knew that I knew, but I still rocked up to her book launch. And as you'll see in the show, I stood there in the crowd and just really stared at her and just made a point of, that there's someone here that knows and is going to hold you accountable. And the book launch, she just acted like nothing was going on.
Were you angry through all of this? Once you'd had that kind of confrontation, as they call it, and you were kind of waiting for her to admit, what were the emotions? Was it anger?
I was very angry. My mother has battled cancer twice. I mean, we all have a connection to someone who's had cancer, or we know of someone that has someone close to them who's been touched by cancer. So it made me very angry. What was so alarming is that the message she was putting out was so dangerous, because really vulnerable people with cancer, were making really serious decisions about their life and about their health. So it made my blood boil, especially because now I knew that I made her aware of how serious the situation was. There's been speculation and kind of this narrative about it was just this young woman who was very naive. This lie got away with her and it snowballed. However, that's not what I experienced when I went to her and, made her really aware of how serious this was and urged her to come forward. She just doubled down.
I think the part of it that gets to me as well is, and I'd love your insight on this, is how she would gravitate towards people that were sick and then kind of be a bit of a chameleon and emulate the things that she was seeing. That's a very calculated thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's also very tragic about this story is there were very sick, vulnerable people that she got very close to. One was a little boy who did have brain cancer, and she was fundraising on behalf of him and his family to pay for him to potentially have life-saving surgery. And that money was never handed over. And unfortunately, that little boy has passed away. I'm not saying he passed away because of his association with Belle, but also he was at the birthday party that day that she faked the seizure. So that little boy, Belle's son, they had to witness this lie sort of firsthand as well. So the impact it had on, really vulnerable people is actually, it is so shocking.
After the break, Chanelle tells us about how she approached the journalists who would help her expose Belle Gibson's lies to the world. What did you do next? Obviously, you could see at that book launch she wasn't admitting anything. Do you go to the police? Do you go straight to the journalists? What are your next steps?
Yeah, so the first step I took was going to the police, and the police said that I didn't have any evidence, which I didn't. And it's obviously very difficult to get access to someone's medical records. So, yeah, the police basically turned me away. I went to a very high-profile lawyer, and he accused me of basically defamation and slander. He happened to have a very close friend who had cancer, and he was telling me that he can't even fathom the thought of someone going around accusing, someone of cancer, of lying and faking. So, yeah, for some reason the lawyer, he kind of took it quite personally, and yeah, it made me feel very uncomfortable and didn't help me. I then went to Australia's top investigative journalist at the time. Hadn't heard of Belle before. He said he might look into it, he might not, and I never heard back from him again. This ended up being over a period of sort of kind of weeks to months, and yeah, I was talking to people I knew. I was trying to leverage my network to see if anyone could put me in touch with someone credible who would believe me, who could vouch for me that I was telling the truth. And yeah, so it took quite a long time to get to that point. And during that period, I started to feel very powerless and realized how challenging and difficult it is to essentially kind of be a whistleblower and come forward with the truth and have people look into it and fact check it and stop people from causing harm. So that was really disheartening. So then eventually my former boss spoke to the editor or someone high up at the Age, and they got one of their journalists to get in touch with me. And that journalist was Bo Donnelly, who, with Nick Toscano, they have published the book, The Woman Who Fooled the World, which the Netflix show has been adapted from. So as Bo tells the story, he just thought that this was just some random tip-off that he had to check off his list, that maybe it was a jealous friend with an axe to grind, or, they get tip-offs come into the newsroom all the time, and most of them don't really go anywhere. So he actually just called me on his lunch break. He was at a cafe. It was very noisy. I just started to tell him what I knew, what I experienced, and what my motivation was for coming forward, which was just for Belle to stop causing harm to vulnerable people and spreading this misinformation. So Bo very quickly from that call felt that I was very credible and started to look into the case straight away.
In the Netflix show, the first article that they release is that money fraud angle, the charities that weren't getting the donations that Belle promised. Is that what happened in real life? Is that the only angle they could put out to start with?
Yes, that's right. The Age also couldn't run a story that they were just suspecting that this woman didn't have cancer. The lawyers at the Age shut it down very quickly because, again, the Age couldn't get access to her medical records. There was no way to verify the status of her health. And so the journalists, Bo and Nick, they thought, well, if she's lying about something as big as this, as big as having cancer and broadcasting that to the world, then what else is she lying about? And I shared with them that comment that Clive had made the night that I had confronted Belle about the state of the business books. And so they started looking into whether she had actually made any donations to the charities that she had been fundraising on behalf of. And they all said they'd never received a cent from her.
So once that angle is out there, that's obviously a huge hit to Belle, and that's the start. That's how it starts to kind of unravel more publicly.
Mm.
Were they then able to verify the cancer claims? How did they manage to get that part of the investigation out?
Sure. So coincidentally, around this time that I'd gone to the journalists at The Age and they had reported on her charity fraud, there was actually a journalist at the Australian, Richard Gilliatt, who had started to look into Belle, and I think he'd written some stories about Jess Ainscough, who in the Netflix show is the character Miller. His wife actually had cancer, and I think she had looked into natural remedies and she'd kind of come across Jess. And then as a result of that, it was actually from Richard's own personal experience with his wife that he started then sort of looking into these people. And then he actually at the same time was starting to unravel it all. And then it was very shortly after The Age had broken the charity fraud story. I think it was within a few days that Richard Gilliatt, the Australian, broke the story that Belle didn't have cancer. He met with her and she said the same thing to him, that her diagnosis was questionable and she herself actually didn't know for certain if she had cancer or not.
Once these stories and investigations started to get published, did any of it shock you? Was there any kind of revelations that came out that you didn't realise?
Nothing was really shocking to me at that point anymore when it came to Belle. I feel like I'd kind of seen the worst of it, especially with that seizure. It's something I'll never, I don't know, be able to get out of my mind, and the way the children reacted that day. So yeah, nothing really surprised me or shocked me about Belle anymore. There were things that came out, people from her past, her childhood, things like she had gone to acting school and things like that, which, I mean, kind of made sense to me. I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah, I mean, it didn't surprise me that it came out that she had been doing this for a long time. She had been in this skating forum, in this skating community, where she was telling all these people that she'd had heart surgeries and she died on the operating table and had been brought back to life and had all these life-threatening diseases. And as a result of that, people in that community were sending her flowers and giving her lots of attention. So, I mean, it was interesting to see kind of some of the origin of where this all began for her and why, and that this was obviously a pattern.
Did you have any contact with her during that time as it was all unravelling?
The day the first story broke, I did send her a text message. That's the final communication I've had with her, and I haven't heard from her since then.
What did you say in the text message?
I said that, so Belle always had this saying that she would say, and for example, she posted it on this stage 4 cancer diagnosis on her Instagram when she announced that, and she'd always say, you know, I've now got stage 4 cancer, but don't worry, I've got this. Or I'm fundraising all this money to help this boy, you know, get life-saving surgery. I've got this. And so, yeah, I sent her a text message that day as soon as the first article broke, and I said, you should check the news, but you've got this, right? It was a bit of a jab.
A fair enough jab.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of soul searching in the last 10 years and have tried to forgive Belle, which I can't, and I'm not sure I ever can. But at that point, you know, I was really relieved that she couldn't keep spreading the lies that she was doing, and I was so frustrated and really angry that it took so long for the truth to come out, and that she was, you know, so combative to come out and tell the truth herself. So yeah, that's why I sent the text message. I was kind of just at my wit's end with it all.
Well, it all obviously really unravelled quickly once, the charity stuff had been exposed, the cancer was fake. There's this 60 Minutes interview that's really famous. She's in a pink turtleneck and she's kind of being forced to, I guess, kind of admit, but she doesn't really. She kind of does this evasive kind of around the questions, even though all the truth is already out there by then.
You had 3 heart operations. You suffered 2 cardiac arrests. You died twice on the operating table. You had a stroke. And you were diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumour and given 4 months to live.
Correct. And
all that happened.
I still have the heart condition and I was supposed to have surgery for that.
You were supposed to have surgery.
And I didn't.
How did you feel watching that interview?
That interview was really difficult to watch, but it was validating in a way for the world to finally see what I was up against in terms of trying to get the truth from Belle, trying to get a straight answer from her, which obviously in that interview, Tara Brown could not get one straight answer from her. And yeah, it was kind of validating in a way. But at the same time, it was really sad to see that her community and the people she took advantage of were getting no accountability, no apology, no real, genuine apology, and no closure. So that was the hardest part about watching it.
Do you have any idea where this kind of compulsive lying and scamming comes from in Belle? Do you think it's malice, trauma? Do you have a theory?
I mean, obviously, Belle is a very deeply troubled person, and there seems to be, maybe a number of reasons for that. She did have, I think, a difficult childhood, but a lot of people experience difficult childhoods, trauma in their childhoods, and they don't go on to become a con artist and take advantage of society's most vulnerable people. So I do sometimes think that that's kind of maybe an easy way to explain maybe why she did what she did. I think it's important to look at. And she had been doing this for quite a long time as well. She had hurt other people. Other people had kind of caught her out on other lies. And so she had already experienced the impact that causes on people and obviously has not really experienced much remorse maybe from that. I'm not going to comment on her state of mind or her mental health, but from what I witnessed and experienced with Belle, what I saw was that she was using it basically as a business strategy to make money and to be in the limelight, to be adored, to build a business and to change her life. She was, just, I guess, quite an ordinary person. And when she started bringing in this money, her lifestyle changed a lot. She transitioned to more of kind of a lavish lifestyle. She started renting a multi-million-dollar beach house, renting a BMW, flying first class on holidays overseas, buying designer things. So in my opinion, that's what I witnessed and experienced, is that she saw that her lie was benefiting her financially and she ran with that.
You're listening to True Crime Conversations with me, Gemma Barth. I'm speaking with the woman who exposed Belle Gibson's lies, Chanelle McAuliffe. Up next, we hear more about the court proceedings and where Belle Gibson is now, nearly 10 years on. How do you feel about the court proceedings that happened after everything came out? Because she went to court, she was fined $410,000. There's no jail time or anything like that. Do you think that was a fitting punishment?
It was good to see that there was some justice brought, but it has come out recently that it's maybe not possible for the court to enforce that penalty, and she hasn't paid any of that penalty. And actually $150,000 of that penalty was to go to the family of the little boy that had brain cancer that she took advantage of as compensation for their suffering. So it's really upsetting that potentially that family won't see that money. And, you know, it's been quite a long time. It's been many years since she was fined. And Belle, I know that Belle has earned some type of income over the last few years, and Belle could take it upon herself to start contributing to that fine, to start making amends, to take accountability and make things right. So that's disappointing that she's not coming to the table and doing that. Overall, the justice system, I guess, is quite broken in that sense that there hasn't really been real justice.
She has managed to lay pretty low since everything happened. We do know there was a story about 5 years ago that came out that she was trying to integrate herself into the Ethiopian community in Melbourne and trying to raise funds for them, almost kind of going down the same kind of route of fundraising. And they found out, cut her out. It all kind of ended. But what did you make of that, of her kind of trying to reinvent herself in that way?
I knew she would. Again, nothing that Belle does anymore is shocking or surprising to me. This has been a pattern she's been repeating basically her whole life. And it was really sad to see, especially for that community that she was infiltrating. And I think there's also been this narrative that Belle really wants to kind of be accepted by a community. She wants to fit in, but like she could go join a book club. You know, like there are spaces, you know, she could go join a sporting team. There are spaces that you can go to be a part of a community and feel accepted and feel like you're part of something without having to take advantage of people.
Do you know much about what she's doing nowadays?
I don't know what she's up to. Sometimes I hear little rumours, but I don't really pay much attention to it. But I'm sure she's looking at what her next hustle is.
You were the original whistleblower in this story, and the reality is if you have tried to do what you did in any other kind of environment, corporate, government, political, you could have been prosecuted. Is that something that you thought about at the time?
There wasn't any kind of scenario where I wasn't going to follow through with what I did. This actually hasn't been the first time I've been a whistleblower. If I see something that's wrong, I can't turn a blind eye to it. It's very discouraging for a lot of. I know a lot of people have struggled to come forward and tell the truth on different things because people have been reprimanded and prosecuted for speaking up and telling the truth. It is a very challenging thing to do, and it can be a scary thing to do, especially, you know, when there's other interests at play, if companies are profiting. So, yeah, whistleblowers can easily be silenced and be scared away from trying to come forward and tell the truth. Yeah, it just wasn't in my nature to not do that, to not align with my values, to just stand by and let something bad happen.
Are there any protections in place for whistleblowers in Australia? I know it's an area that you feel quite passionately about.
Yeah, there have been legislation come into effect in the last few years to protect whistleblowers, especially in the workplace, from retaliation. But it's only legislation and regulation and law only can go so far when people are, or the law or governments or workplaces are willing to enforce it and make sure those people really are protected.
For me, it feels like whistleblowing should be something that we support, because if there's wrongdoing going on in certain institutions, surely we should know about it. The fact that it's something that people might be scared about doing because they could potentially face criminal charges is insane.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot more work can be done in this space to protect people coming forward and telling the truth. And it is a very scary thing to take on. Like I said earlier, there was 1% of me that was still questioning myself. God, what if she doesn't have cancer and I've got this all wrong? And that's part of it, right? Like that you see in the media and you see in cases that people haven't been protected. And then so that makes you question yourself in many ways. It makes you question, do I really know the truth, or am I going to be safe to come forward?
What are you doing with your life now? Has being involved in this, in whistleblowing, in uncovering kind of the scam that was Belle Gibson, has that changed your life and your kind of goals in life in terms of what you want to give back?
Yeah, it definitely led me down a path that I may not have gone down if I hadn't have gone through what I did with Belle. I ended up moving and working in the outback with remote Indigenous communities, working on policy and as a financial counsellor, preventing economic abuse against Indigenous people in the outback, because unfortunately those communities are actually targeted a lot by scams. So while I was out there doing that work, I was doing financial literacy education, working with regulators to tighten regulation and laws around predatory payday lenders that were targeting Indigenous people. Since then, I've gone on to work for basically one of Australia's only social impact finance fund that provides capital to Indigenous people wanting to start a business or grow their business, because they have a lot of challenges accessing capital, especially from mainstream banks. They can be, discouraged from accessing capital from those avenues. So, yeah, it's something that's very important to me to do work that's very meaningful and impactful and that can help people. And I especially love to do work where I can give people a voice that aren't able to necessarily use their own voice, and especially prevent or stop people being taken advantage of, because that's just it's something I really can't stand.
I know there's a lot of buzz right now. Everyone's talking about Belle, but it was, nearly a decade ago that all this happened. Do you think about it often anymore?
No, I haven't. Over the years, I don't really think about it too much. I've already given so much energy and mental capacity to all of this. I did film for a documentary that's coming out in Netflix in a few weeks. So I was involved with that. I mean, I have reflected on it at times. Especially right now with how big the story has gotten again. Well, it's actually gotten even bigger than ever before. And as much as I can't forgive Belle, I can't help but think that this would maybe be quite difficult for her. And given, she is a troubled person, I do wonder about her mental health at this time and the whole time, actually. And I do hope that she is okay at the end of the day.
So you do still have empathy for her in amongst all of the anger?
I mean, yeah, like Belle is still human at the end of the day, a very complex, complicated, troubled human. And I actually just hope that she can eventually learn from all this and and evolve from it and make amends. So, yeah, I mean, that is what I hope for.
Do you think she can, though? Do you think she can actually redeem herself?
I think it will be difficult in the public eye. I think the public will probably have a difficult time forgiving her, and that's understandable. But I hope she can redeem herself just for herself, even in her personal life. I hope she can evolve and learn from this and not do something like this again in any capacity. So, yeah, it's very wishful thinking to think that there could be some redemption.
Thanks to Chanelle for telling us her story. True Crime Conversations is a Mamamia podcast, hosted and produced by me, Gemma Barth, and Tali Blackman, with audio design by Jacob Round. Thanks so much for listening. I'll be back next week with a very interesting true crime conversation with the anonymous host of Case File.